Anastasia's mate. Anastasia's mate is when the opponent's king is next to the board's border and is trapped by his own pawn and the opponent's knight whilst being mated by the rook. Here's an example. As you can see, the king's escape route is blocked by the knight and his own pawn. Thus, the only thing we need to do now is finish the game by simply playing rook h2. Here's another example. In this position we can see the makings of an Anastasia's mate. By remembering the setup, we come to the conclusion that the right move is knight to e5 check, and after black moves to the h-file, we slide the rook over to h2, finishing the job.
So, I last 30 seconds, you let me take you out on a proper date.
Last 60 seconds and I'll let you me.
Fine.
Was it worth it?
I sacrificed all 206 bones in my body for the sake of the 207th, but it was worth it.
Next time, I highly recommend joining Chess Page 1 school community. You will learn to become a better chess player and won't lose any bones like Black Bishop. There's a 5-day money-back guarantee, so it's a no-brainer, and Chess Thugs has an affiliate link in the video description and pinned comment. Go and use it now.
Anderssen's mate. Anderssen's mate is when a rook checkmates the opponent's king on the back rank, whilst being supported by a pawn on the 7th rank. In this position, white simply plays rook to h8 and delivers the Anderssen's mate. In this position though, it is not as straightforward. However, we can already visualize the perfect setup. First we play g7 check. After the black king scoots over to g8, we do not panic and start giving checks that lead to nowhere. Instead, we play the cool, calm and collected rook to h2, and the Anderssen's mate is unavoidable, as after black plays literally anything, rook to h8 mate will follow. Arabian mate. Arabian mate occurs when the opponent's king is on one of the last rank's corners, and it's being hugged by a rook supported by a knight. This is the final position of an Arabian mate. As you can see, the rook is attacking the king whilst the knight covers the g8 square and defends the rook. Here's another example. In this position we need to checkmate black quick. Thus we have to lead him to the corner in order to apply the Arabian mate. So we first play bishop h6 check, kicking out the king. Next we play knight to f6 check, followed by rook h7 mate, completing the Arabian mate. Backrank mate. Backrank mate is when a rook checkmates the king on the last rank due to the king's escape route being blocked by his own pawns. Here's an example. Since black's king is stuck behind his own pawns, we just simply slide the rook over to the 8th rank and deliver a backrank mate. Now look at this position. As you can see, black's king is stuck in this example as well. Thus we should look for a backrank mate. However, since the back rank is being protected by a rook, we can't do anything, right? Wrong. We can sacrifice the queen and end up with a rook on the back rank, leading to mate. Balestra mate. Balestra mate is a checkmate pattern where the bishop and the queen cover the squares that the other doesn't. It is a perfect display of sublime coordination between both pieces. As you can see in this position, by simply playing bishop to c6 we checkmate, as the bishop and the queen perfectly complement each other. Here, however, we first need to lure the king to c8 with queen d6 check. Afterwards, we complete the Balestra mate with bishop to a6. Blackburne's mate. Blackburne's mate involves two bishops slicing the diagonals where the king can escape to, whilst the knight supports the bishop that is delivering the mate. In this position we have a textbook Blackburne's mate. By playing bishop to h7 we achieve the desired outcome. Now take this position. Some of you beginners would probably play bishop to h7. However, there is a better move. We would like to play bishop to h7, and it'd be a checkmate if that annoying g7 pawn was not in the way. So to get rid of that pawn, we play the incredible queen takes h6. After black captures our queen thinking that we blundered, we play bishop to h7 and deliver a Blackburne's mate. Blind swine mate. Blind swine mate is the perfect example of the overwhelming power of the pair of rooks on the 7th rank. It happens when the king is checkmated by the two rooks on the corner, on the edge of the board, whilst being blocked by one of his pieces on the side where the rooks can't cover. Here we have an example of the blind swine mate, as after we play rook to g7 the mate is complete. Here's another example. In this position we simply put the first rook on a7 and the second rook on b7, achieving mate. Boden's mate. Boden's mate is similar to the Blackburne's mate, however a knight isn't needed as some of the escape routes are blocked by his own pieces. Due to this, the only requirement is two bishops in a crisscross applesauce manner slicing through the opposition from afar. In this position, the only way to escape the bishop's wrath would be to run to the d-file. However, since black's pieces are blocking it, we can simply deliver mate with bishop to a6. Here's another example. As you probably already noticed, the bishops are in their rightful position, and yet they can't do anything as they are blocked. So we play knight to b6, completely opening up the board and activating the snipers. After black forcibly captures the knight, we deliver the Boden's mate with bishop to a6 check. After black blocks with the queen, we end his suffering by recapturing with the bishop, or if you are feeling fancy with the pawn. Corner mate. Corner mate is when, you mate in a corner? Not the naughty kind but, you know, the chess kind. Here black is already on the ropes, thus we just need to land the finishing blow, knight to f7 mate. Here however we simply force black to block himself by playing pawn takes b8 check. After black recaptures with the bishop we play knight to b6 mating in the corner. Corridor mate. Corridor mate is when the files adjacent to the king are covered by two heavy pieces, whilst the checkmating piece is on the same file as the king. As you can see in this position the rooks form the walls of the corridor, and all that is left for us to do is send an angry wife to chase after the king in the middle of said corridor. Now look at this position. Just like the previous one, we slide the queen back from h7 to c2 and mate on the next move. Diagonal corridor mate. It is similar to the corridor mate but it involves blocking a rank, a file, and mating on the diagonal. Here we can see the resemblance with the normal corridor mate and just as easily we can deliver mate with the bishop. Dovetail mate. Dovetail mate is when the mating queen is one square diagonally from the checkmated king. Here for example we have a situation where black's only escape is the f5 square. Thus we simply apply the dovetail mate by playing queen to h3. Here's another example. In this position we bait the king to the h-file by playing h5. After he takes the pawn we begin Operation Dovetail by shooing the king to g4 with queen h7 check. After the king flees to g4, we end his suffering with queen h3 mate, just like in the previous example. Damiano's mate. Damiano's mate is a checkmate pattern that is actually decently common. It consists of a queen checkmating a castled king on h2 or h7, whilst being supported by a pawn or a bishop adjacent to it. This position is a textbook Damiano's mate. After white plays queen to h7, you can see the resemblance between the position that was described earlier. This checkmate can arise in a normal game in a very tactical and fun way. Just look at this position. Here if black manages to take the g6 pawn, our attack fizzles out, and although we have a nice position we can't hope for much. Thus, we need to be fast in order to not let that happen. That is why we play rook h8. After black takes the rook we slide our queen to h5 and promptly deliver mate on h7. David and Goliath mate. David and Goliath mate has the perfect mate for what it represents. It consists of a measly pawn, checkmating the king. It is considered one of the most gangster ways to checkmate. Here's an example. In this position we push our pawn to h3, and it seems like David has killed Goliath. Here's another example. In this position black plays f5 thinking that everything is okay. However we calmly play en passant and see the joy on his face turn into despair as the king is now checkmated by a pawn. Epaulette mate. Epaulette mate is a mate that resembles an elite military personnel's shoulder piece. It consists of a queen closely checkmating the king due to said king being blocked by his own pieces by his side. This is what an epaulette mate looks like. By playing queen e6 black dies trapped by his own pieces. Here's an example. Here we take the knight and promote to a rook. After black recaptures with the rook, we slide our queen to g6 to deliver the epaulette mate. Fool's mate. Fool's mate only occurs if you either are purposefully trying to lose rating or you are an absolute buffoon with room temperature IQ. It happens when the opponent has a stroke and just creates the checkmating avenue for you in 2 moves. Here's the one and only example. Here black plays queen h4 mate and white dies like a fool. Greco's mate. Greco's mate is on the board when the bishop helps trap the king to a corner of the board and the rook deals the fatal blow. As you can see in this position black is completely stuck to the corner, thus we only need to finish him off with rook h1 mate. Here's a possible middle game position. Here we play bishop c4 check, and if black runs with the king to the corner instead of blocking with the rook, we hit him with the absolute bomb that is queen h7 check. After black recaptures, we Greco mate him with rook h1 check. H-file mate. H-file mate is a checkmate that occurs in the H-file. Simple, right? Here by playing rook h8, we deliver an H-file mate. But what if the file is blocked by a pawn? Just break that shit open. Here the h7 pawn is blocking our hopes and dreams, so we sacrifice our queen to open that bitch. After the king recaptures we slide our rook to the H-file and mate on h8. Hookmate. The hookmate is very similar to the Arabian mate we showed earlier. However, instead of the rook checkmating horizontally, it checkmates vertically. Naturally this comes with other conditions such as the king being blocked by his own pawn, and the knight being supported. Here's an example. By playing rook h8, we achieve the hookmate. Here's another example. First we take the queen's eyes away from e8 by sacrificing our bishop with bishop c4 check. After black takes with the queen, we sacrifice our own queen and deliver the hookmate. Killbox mate. The killbox occurs when the queen and the rook put the opponent's king inside a box. Afterwards the rook deals the finishing blow whilst being supported by the queen. This is a normal killbox position. By playing rook d8 we kill the king inside of a box. Now take a look at this position. First we sacrifice our bishop. Then we sacrifice our knight. Finally we hit black with a two-piece combo and deliver the killbox mate. Ladder mate. Ladder mate is when you have two rooks or a queen and a rook, and you repeatedly check the king while going through the ranks or the files one by one, resembling a ladder. This is the simplest ladder mate. By playing rook b1, the game ends instantly. Here we could ladder check black until we mate. However, we can play the sexy quiet move rook a4 in order to shorten the time needed to mate. After black moves anywhere, we ladder mate him. Legals mate. I could explain to you what it is, but I think it is better to just show you. This is the one and only example. Here we take the e5 pawn, sacrificing our queen. After black naively takes our queen, we deliver the legals mate. Lolli's mate. This checkmate pattern is one of the most common ones in practice. It results in the queen checkmating the king on g7, whilst being supported by the f6 or h6 pawn. It normally happens when there is a fianchetto setup, where the fianchettoed bishop is lost. Here's an example. By playing queen to g7, we achieve the textbook Lolli's mate. Here's another example. In this position, we simply play queen to h6, and the Lolli's mate is unstoppable. Max Lange's mate. Max Lange's mate is a nice checkmate pattern that once again shows the great harmony between the queen and the bishop. This position shows a normal Max Lange's mate after white plays queen g1. Here's an example. We can't apply the Max Lange's mate as the knight is covering g8, so we get rid of it by playing rook takes f6. After the queen recaptures, we now can and will play the Max Lange's mate. Mayet's mate. Mayet's mate is when a rook delivers a back rank mate adjacent to the enemy king whilst being supported by the bishop. Additionally, the king is blocked by his own pieces. Here's a very simple example. By playing rook e8 white checkmates black, as the rook is protected by the bishop and the king is trapped. Here's another example. We need to lure the king to f8. However, if we carelessly check the king, black will just block the check. So instead we double check, and after the king goes to f8, we apply the Mayet's mate. Morphy's mate. Remember the Greco's mate we talked about earlier? Well, this is extremely similar. Instead of the bishop being the one to block the king and the rook checkmating, it is the rook that does the blocking job whilst the bishop destroys the king. As you can see in this position, the black king is trapped in the corner of the h-file. Thus we just need to slide the bishop over to the grand diagonal to win the game. Here we have a similar position. However, in this case the black's queen is covering the diagonal. Thus we bait it out of the diagonal by sacrificing our rook. After that we again slide our bishop to the grand diagonal and win the game. Opera mate. The opera mate is one of the most iconic and popular checkmates in the world. It is extremely similar to the Mayet's mate. However, in the opera mate the bishop is on the correct side, making it so that black does not need to have a pawn in front of the king in order to be checkmated. This is the simplest way you can have the opera mate, by playing rook to d8 white checkmates, as the rook is protected by the bishop. Also, if you compare this position with the first example of the Mayet's mate, you can see that it is almost the same thing. Here's another example. By double checking the king we reach a position similar to the previous one, so we simply do what we did before and mate the king on d8. Pillsbury's mate. Pillsbury's mate is when the bishop controls the corner next to a castled king whilst the rook checkmates the king. Additionally, some of the king's escape routes are blocked by pawns and or pieces. This position represents the basic state of a Pillsbury's mate. After white plays rook g1, all hope is lost for black as the game ends in checkmate. Here's an example. In this position we break open the king side with the amazing knight to h6. After black recaptures we simply play rook to g1, delivering the Pillsbury's mate. Reti's mate. Reti's mate is similar to the opera mate. However, instead of the bishop supporting the checkmating rook, it is the other way around. In this position we can achieve the Reti's mate by playing bishop to d8, as the black king is again trapped by his own pieces. Scholar's mate. Scholar's mate is probably the first checkmating pattern that everyone learns, especially if you started as a kid in a club. It again displays the great coordination between the bishop and the queen in a crisscross manner. There is really only one scholar's mate that you need to know. It starts by advancing the e-pawn to the 4th rank. Afterwards we flank black with the bishop and the queen, and deliver mate on f7. Smothered mate. Smothered mate is when you checkmate with a single knight due to the fact that the opponent's king is completely trapped on all sides by his own pieces. Here, even though black is up 3 points in material, these are irrelevant as white checkmates with knight to f7 by smothering the king. In this position we can achieve the same thing. First we double check the king and force him to go to h8. Afterwards, we sacrifice our queen on g8 in order to lure one of black's pieces there. Finally we smother the king with the knight. Suffocation mate. It is almost the same as the smothered mate, however here the king has one escape route that unfortunately for him is covered by a piece. Here's an example of the suffocation mate. As you can see, after playing knight to f7 we checkmate the king in almost the same way as the smothered mate. Again, by applying the same principle, we can find the same solution to this position. Just like in the smothered mate, we double check the king, then sacrifice the queen, and checkmate with the knight. Swallow's tail mate. Swallow's tail mate occurs when you put your queen right in front of the opponent's king while it is in front of two of his pawns, which block diagonal escape routes, which unfortunately for him would be the only saving grace. In this position, we give a huge deadly hug to the black king with queen to g5, ending the game in a weird manner. Here's another example. In this position, we bait the queen over to f7, and again, hug the king very tightly with our queen. Triangle mate. Triangle mate is the faster version of the ladder mate. It is a similar technique and yet it looks very different. It works by checkmating with the queen, whilst it is supported by a rook 2 squares to its side. Here's a very simple example of a triangle mate, as after we play queen to f4, the shape of the pieces resembles a triangle. Here's another example. We first sacrifice the rook in g6 in order to lure the queen. Afterwards we complete the triangle with queen f4 mate. Railroad mate. Railroad mate occurs when you repeatedly apply the triangle mate and the killbox mate techniques in order to in the end achieve a mate yourself. A great thing about the railroad mate is that you can pre-move the whole mate like Hikaru, which helps you during time trouble. Just look at this position. By repeatedly applying the triangle and killbox mate techniques, you can easily win even before the opponent loses. Vukovich mate. Vukovich mate is another variant of the rook and knight mate. However, instead of needing the king to be in a corner or blocked by his own pieces, this mate can occur in the middle of the board. It happens when a rook supported by a piece is right in front of the king whilst a knight is behind it. This position represents the basis of the Vukovich mate, as after we play rook f7 the king has absolutely nowhere to go due to the influence of the knight and the support of the pawn. Here's another example. After we play knight to b6, the king has to go to b8, as the d8 rook blocks its other escape. Now we simply apply the Vukovich mate with rook b7 mate.